Okay, folks, first political commentary. Told you I would get to them, so here we are. But I have debated in my mind about how I want to do this, so I don't want to jump all over the board and talk about 10 different things that are going on. I'll maybe do a recap of what's happening and my own opinion on this kind of stuff. But I want to pick one or two subject matters to be able to focus on things and just give you my personal opinion and what some of the biblical things that might line up with it would mean. So take it for what it's worth. Everybody has their opinions. I try to form mine from a lot of research and digging and looking at conservative, liberal, Christian. I'll look at atheist viewpoint. I'll look at any viewpoint, but eventually align everything up with the Bible. I don't make it fit, but you can, if you know how to study the Bible and you know what's in the Bible, you can actually find some type of story, some type of scripture, or some type of parable or something that relates to current events and different things that happen in life in general. So, but this political stuff can be a little tricky. So we're going to talk about the Federal Reserve. And a lot of people are under the misconception that the Federal Reserve is really controlled and run by our government, and it's really not. Some historians will paint a picture of the Federal Reserve coming out of the first Bank of America back when our first Secretary of State, Alexander Hamilton, went way back in 1780s. And yes, there was a Central Bank of America developed by our country, and in fact, George Washington approved of it. So we could say that, but honestly, the Federal Reserve doesn't fit under that umbrella. So that's fine. You know, we were a young country having a central banking system. That makes sense. You know what I mean? A main bank. But around 1907, there was what we would say a financial crisis. And you're going to find in history that every time something is about to happen, whether it's war or some kind of pivot, especially in America, because I do most of my studies around America. I'm American, obviously. You'll see a financial crash. It's very interesting, you know, as you look at pivot points in history. So the finances have a lot to do with what's going on, and more importantly, who owns and controls the finances. So yes, we had a central bank, and, you know, we can trace it back to the 1780s and Alexander Hamilton being our first Secretary of State. And obviously, George Washington, all the founding fathers, yes, there was a central bank, and that's fine and good. But in 1907, there was a financial crash. And once that arose, this set the table, actually, for a federal agency, okay, a federal agency to be fully developed, which was ushered in under one of my favorite presidents, Woodrow Wilson, along with a few congressmen. Woodrow Wilson, I joke, as my favorite president. He is not. If you've read my book, Discerning Our Time, a lot of this stuff, you'd understand where I'm coming from. But this bank was called the Federal Reserve, or the Federal Reserve Act, actually. It was in 1913. There was what was called the Federal Reserve Act that was implemented. And this gave birth to 12 main banks across America that hold and control the monetary systems of this country. So like I say, I'm talking about America. I do my studies and research in America, so that's where all my information, that's where my notes come from. That's where even my studies on my book came from, was American history. And it's always interesting to me that right around the 1900s, a lot of things happened. So as I cover in my book, the early 1900s, and certainly President Wilson, was where I believe the elite families and the Illuminati, or the Illuminati organization, whatever you want to consider it, hatched a satanic type of agenda, or was influenced satanically. They were before that. But they were, that progressive globalist movement really touched base here in America. Late 1800s, early 1900s. Very key in the early 1900s. So America was growing right at that point, and a potential powerhouse. America was considered, wow, this thing is going to be powerful. And the folks, or the powers that be, viewed this, and they knew it could be a superpower and have great benefit only if it was fully controlled and steered in the right direction. So the Federal Reserve became a more independent agency around the 1920s somewhere. And though it still appears the American Congress has some authority over it, there should be great concern as to just who controls the Federal Reserve, because some of it's an illusion and some of it's shrouded in mystery, as we say. Because it's the standard, think about it, it's the standard for the American dollar. It controls and regulates banking system, the American dollar. It actually rescues financial institutions. But the truth of the matter is that they have their own board of governors, okay? Their own board of governors, and really answer to themselves. They're a power unto themselves. Over the years, each of the 12 Federal Reserve banks have developed into their own independent banking system like private corporations. Yet they somehow all work together, and we're told this for the greater good of America. Okay, believe what you want. I'm going to give you some of the names. Now, you could say some of these names are connected to the Illuminati, and you can believe what you want. I have my own personal beliefs with them, and I do believe, yes. But J.P. Morgan, the Rothschilds, big one there. Rockefellers, Goldman Sachs, Lehman. Some of these names became powerhouses in America, and some of them obviously from Europe, the Rothschilds. Powerhouses in America very early on, late 1800s, early 1900s, and especially there was a market crash, right? So just to name a few of the powerhouses, those are some of the names connected to the Federal Reserve, which is another interesting point. Okay, J.P. Morgan, do your research. Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Goldman Sachs, Lehman. Now the interesting thing is, like the Rothschilds, they're huge, right? European. You can look at most oil companies, banking companies, they're involved somewhere behind line. I'm talking big, all over the place. Beyond an octopus, more arms than an octopus their family has. You ever heard of Allen Dulles? Allen Dulles, D-U-L-L-E-S. Look it up. The Dulles family. They happen to be, just so happen, to be cousins of the Rockefellers, I believe it is, from my research. Allen Dulles was one of the first men who were instrumental in creating and getting involved in a little organization called the CIA. Okay? Money Connections, cousin of very wealthy Money Connections, starts and helps to start or whatever, get involved with, become the head of the CIA. You got to connect the dots with a lot of things. See, after Goldman Sachs, Lehman Bank, and others profited from a crash in 1929, that's a famous one, everybody should know about that one, House Banking Committee Chairman Louis McFadden, a Democrat of New York, said of the Great Depression, okay, Louis McFadden, it was no accident. It was a carefully contrived occurrence. The international bankers sought to bring about a condition of despair here, in America meaning, so they might merge or emerge as rulers of us all. Louis McFadden, Democrat from New York, stated that. So there was profiting from the 1929 crash, not from the little guys. Some folks profited. Bank of International Settlements, BSI, look that one up. BSI, Bank of International Settlements, one of the most powerful banks in Europe, and like several other worldwide financial institutions, they are run by or deeply connected with the Federal Reserve. Great, right? So this goes back to the 1930s. Again, I tell you, connect the dots. Watch this again. If you've never heard these things, do the research. It's out there. There's men much brighter than me and that have worked a lot harder than me to dig up these facts, and they are facts. I'm just a little pastor here in New England that's going to explain all this and tie it all together biblically. So, this goes back to the 1930s, BSI, okay? European Bank, all right? The Federal Reserve will report to the U.S. Treasury Department. That's not a lie. That's a fact. But, big but here, basically it answers to the banking corporations that own it, okay? So, yeah, they'll hand some paperwork in, and you're going to hear all kinds of wonderful stories, depending on who's telling you the narrative, that they answer to the Treasury Department and we have control over the Federal Reserve. Not so much, as they used to say, right? Remember the saying, not so much? Guess what? Many of them, the corporations that own and run the Federal Reserve, are overseas, folks. Okay, like the main office for one of the banks is in Switzerland, that BSI, I believe it is. But also Middle East investments, very interesting. Big in Europe, European investments, Rothschilds. So historian, here's another little quote for you. Carol Quigley. Some people know, some people don't know. Carol Quigley wrote in his book, it's an epic book they call it, right? Tragedy and Hope, that the BSI, that big bank I'm telling you about, Bank of International Settlements, was part of a plan to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economic world as a whole, to be controlled in a feudalistic fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreements. The book is called Tragedy and Hope, written by a historian, Carol Quigley, I pronounce it right, and it's talking about that BSI bank that I'm telling you about in Europe. And that's what's in there, to create a system. This is what his research unfolded. To create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. To be controlled in a feudalistic fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreements. Men much smarter than me and have been around long before I was even born have dug into this stuff, and the stuff has not been debunked, which means to me it sits kind of true, okay? IMF, you ever heard of that one? It's another huge powerhouse financial institution. International Monetary Funds, IMF, and the World Bank. Heard of that one? Owned and operated by who? Fully owned and operated by America? No, the United Nations. We'll have to do some a political commentary on the United Nations sometime very soon. That might be a very interesting one. We'll talk about some evil involved in that. Americans, you know about the Ford motor car, a gentleman named Henry Ford, right? Here's one of his quotes. Henry Ford, very intelligent guy, American entrepreneur. It is well enough that people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system. For if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning. Quote Henry Ford. It is well enough that people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system. In other words, it's on purpose. For if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow. Pretty good quote. When was the last market crash? Think about it, folks. Not that long ago, 2008. 2008. Remember, every time there's a market crash or something happens with the market, the money, somebody pulling strings behind the scenes, there's things going on, as we would say. Reasons. There are those that profit and reasons that they happen. So in 2008, within a year, guess what happened after the market crash? Right around 2009. A little operation came out on the computer called Bitcoin. Now, a buddy of mine, Charlie, has sent me a lot of stuff on that, and I took a look at it. And the majority of it was pretty difficult to debunk. So if you're interested in Bitcoin, take a look at the inventor, who invented it. By an unknown person, or now I'm finding out could be a group of people, really not sure. I think it's a Japanese name, Satoshi Nakamoto. Look it up. Look it up. Now, you have a nice liberal news site in 2012 or 2014. I think it was MSNBC, which owned and operated probably by the CIA, said that, oh yeah, they found somebody in Silicon Valley, an older gentleman or an older lady that claims that they were involved in the formation of Bitcoin, but that has been debunked from what I can tell. Nobody still knows to this day where Bitcoin came from. It's very interesting. There is one theory, as I said, my buddy Charlie turned me on to, and I looked at, that it's created by AI, artificial intelligence, yes, robotics, because it's really impossible to get in and break the code in there. But it's very interesting, in 2009, Bitcoin came out of nowhere, right? Bitcoins are created as a reward for a process known as mining. So I don't understand it all completely, but what I do understand, what is very clear is, this is quite possibly the first step toward one world dollar, one world banking. One world dollar, one world banking. He who holds the purse strings controls the world, folks. Believe me, there are wealthy names on this list that I just gave you, that are connected to the families I just gave you early in this, that have been offered positions in politics. Some of them, yeah, the cousins and nephews and uncles maybe got involved in a little bit of politics. A lot of them didn't want to because it made less money and it gave them less power. Less money and less power than what they were already doing. In other words, they get much more wealthy staying in the shadows. And we always want to blame the George Soroses of the world. He's absolutely at fault. He's absolutely demonic as far as I'm concerned. But he's not alone, and I keep trying to ring the warning bell. Be very careful. He's not alone. He just so happened the spotlight got shown on him by certain people. So if you think he who holds the purse strings isn't powerful, you're fooling yourself. If you think the Federal Reserve isn't a powerhouse of globalist families, right, that are leaning in that progressive agenda I talk about, I get into in my book, connecting, controlling, and manipulating world events, you are sadly, sadly mistaken, my friends. Do you know what JFK started to show interest in right before he got assassinated? Taking a look at the Federal Reserve. Peel back some of the pages in the Federal Reserve. And look what happened to him. Look at the financial connection between the Roman Catholic Church and the Rothschilds of Europe. Do you know it dates back to 1820s? The Rothschilds in Europe and the Roman Catholic Church. What do you think one of the wealthiest organizations in the world is? ExxonMobil, Citicorp, blah, blah, blah. Guess what? The Rothschilds own most of those. They have, if it's not the Rothschilds, one of the other families, and most of them cow down to the Rothschilds. But no, the Roman Catholic Church is one of the biggest, wealthiest organizations in the world. Guess who they are partners with? The Rothschilds. Going back to 1820s. Financial crashes leave people vulnerable to accept whatever the government and the powerhouse financial institution and those who hold the purse strings put in front of us. So I want you to keep something in mind. Biblically connecting the dots here, if you look at this video and think about what I'm telling you, one world dollar, one world banking system is part of the book of Revelation, end time prophecy. If you don't think we're getting closer to that, I think you're fooling yourself. And I also want to make a mention of, yes, the memo got released, okay? Everybody in the conservative far right has been waiting for that. And honestly, as a Christian conservative, non-denominational, not a crazy conspiracy kind of guy, I wanted to see the memo as well, and I'm glad it got out. But I believe the Democrats are going to come out because they have to hide so much, so many things are going to be revealed. With their own version of it or their own description of it, they are going to do what I said in my predictions a few weeks ago, which is going to make life even more miserable for the Christian right and also go after Donald Trump. They are not stopping. They are going to find a luncheon, a dinner, a business deal that this guy, our president, Donald Trump, got involved in the last 25 or 30 years, somewhere along the line where a Russian was in the room, which would be almost impossible for any billionaire, millionaire, jet-flying businessman not to bump into or do business with a Russian. It's almost impossible in this day and age. But they're going to find something. And they might impeach him, or he might not get a second run at the presidency. I tell you this, my friends. There are things I found out and I made predictions on, and I couldn't get into all of it. But if they come to fruition, that memo is one piece of I believe, 5 or 6 pieces that are going to be coming out in the next 3 to 6 months that are going to show that our government has been turned against us for a lot longer than we think, and both parties. And I have a little sad news for you. Even my mom was a fan of old G.W. Bush, the Bush family. A lot of issues with that family. A lot of issues with 9/11. So I want you to take your time, take a look at this, but don't be fooled, folks. He who holds the purse strings controls things. And this type of thing, when I talk about Illuminatis or wealthy families behind the scenes that own and involved in all these corporations, they're not always American. In fact, a lot of them are outside of America that are manipulating things, and they have been manipulating things since the early 1900s. All I can tell you is, and it's not to promote my book, I could care less, discerning our time. If I die tomorrow, I know I left a warning signal, a template for what is coming, what is happening. And even in that book, I didn't predict anything about Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton because it was written and it was edited and finally published during the run-up to the election. So I had no idea, and I didn't necessarily trust President Trump. It wasn't until the last probably 5 or 6 months that a lot of prayer and a lot of research and a lot of things that opened up to me and things started to look at me and in the eye and say, okay, this isn't fake, this is real, things I found out, have shown me that the hand of God is quite possibly on this president. And this is our last shot to go forward, shine the light on some real evil. Some of you folks out there are not prepared for some of the stuff that I could tell you about because it's grotesque and it has to do with child sex slaverings, child sacrifice different types of pedophilia, drug money, drug running, weapons running, deals with terrorist groups, all from the American city of Washington, D.C., our politicians, for a long time. Some of you guys know this stuff. Some of you folks are going to be shocked. I'm going to say a quick prayer, but every head is bowed, every eye is closed. Father, thank you for this time. That's my commentary, Father. You know my heart is pure, and people can take and do what they wish with my words. This is not a regular Bible lesson. This is my personal opinion with research behind it. I thank you, Father, and I hope someone gets enlightened through your Son's precious name, our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.